We're now on Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis. Rav Ashi V'aliba Rabbi Yehuda, as we discussed. For Rav Ashi Omar Stam Ari Shover Hu Eitzel Malach. So Rav Ashi is of the opinion that even a normal lion is not used for work. It's like a maimed animal, and therefore there's no raya from a Mishnah to support Rav Hanan, as if to say that, well, if you would isolate the issue of danger, then you'd be allowed to sell it. You'd be allowed to sell it for a different reason, because it's not a work animal. So there's no chash that the lion is going to do work on behalf of the Jew, so to speak, on Shabbos. Meisvei. Now this Meisvei is going to quote a brisa that might contradict our Mishnah. But in any event, this brisa is certainly going to be a kash on Rav Hanan, because what? It says, Kshem shein mochrim lehem behemagasa, kach ein mochrim lehem chayagasa, right? Vafilu mokum shemochrim lehem behemadaka, chayagasa ein mochrim lehem. So this brisa clearly takes the position of Rav against Rav Hanan, that there's an absolute prohibition of selling a chayagasa, just like there's an absolute prohibition of selling a behemadaka, and it's not totally a minhag. So if there is such a custom to be permissible, we have to be mavatal such a minhag. Tiyufta Rav Hanan, Amar Rav Tiyufta. That's where the Gemara stays. We have here a clear-cut proof to support Rav and refute Rav Hanan Bar. Okay. Now, remember, I had indicated to you that there's a stira between a brisa and our Mishnah. Ravina Rami Mastisan Abraisa Mashani. Ravina presented a kasha based on a stira between the Mishnah, our Mishnah, and a brisa, and then he somehow is miyashiv the stira. Tanan, we learned in that Mishnah. Ein mochrim lehem dubim v'arayis lo kol davar sheish bo hezek taima. There is pei nesek, the reason why we can't sell these animals because they're dangerous to the public. Less pei nesek, if this very large behema gasa would not chayagasa, would not be dangerous, then mochrim, you're allowed to sell it. That seems to be the indication of our Mishnah. But I'll ask you from a brisa which seems to come to the opposite conclusion. Kishem shein mochrim behema gasa, kach ein mochrim chayagasa, v'afil mochrim shemochrim behema gasa, chayagasa ein mochrim. We have the brisa that says explicitly that a chayagasa has the same status as a behemadaka. Just like in the case of behemadaka, there's an absolute prohibition to sell a behemadaka to an idol worshiper. So too, by process of this analogy, you're not allowed to sell a chayagasa anywhere, anyhow, in any place on the world, any minhag. There is no minhag that would allow it. It's got the same status of behemadaka. And that's against our Mishnah. Umeshani, and the same Ravina who presented this stira revolves the stira, and he says the following. When the Mishnah says that if you would somehow tame the lion, which I don't know, again, maybe in the circuses they know how to do that, but the lion is no longer a danger to the rabbim, and therefore you're allowed to sell it because you don't have the problem of hezek rabbim. And we ask the kash, if that be the case, well, what about the iser of behemadaka, and we equated chayagasa to behemadaka? Gemara says be'ari shavur. Okay, now ari shavur, which literally means that it's got a broken leg or something, but that's not really what it means. Ari shavur means that you were able to tame the lion and neutralize that element of danger. And I'll leave it to Rabbi Yehuda. And now we're going to say that the Mishnah in a case of Arish Shavur reflects the Shita Rabbi Yehuda, who says that what are you going to do with an Arish Shavur? It can't do any work, and it's not, able. You're not able to mate it with a male and a female. The Brisa is not talking about a case of an Arish Shavur, so you can't use the heter of Rabbi Yehuda, but rather it's talking about a healthy Chaya Gasa. And in the case of a healthy Chaya Gasa, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it has the status that's equal to that of a Behema Daka. You're not allowed to sell it under any circumstances. Rav Ashi Omar, so all that was Ravina. Rav Ashi says, Stam Arish Shavu Eitzel Malach. Whether or not you find a lion that's maimed or you find a lion that's absolutely healthy. In either case, it's not. It's not subject to malacha. So the Mishnah is a reflection of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that a lion is regarded legally, al pidin, as maimed, and therefore you're allowed to sell it if it's not dangerous. The Bryce, on the other hand, follows the Shita of the Rabbanon, and we're not going to make any exception whatsoever for any sort of maimed animals, and therefore unconditionally we're not going to allow the sale of these large behema gasas. Maskiflor of Nachman man lemelan tarich chaya gasa. The whole discussion is built on a premise. I would question that premise: is a lion a behema a chaya gasa? Dilma chaya daka. Now, why isn't a lion a chaya daka? I looked here, and he says. Okay, if we have time, we'll go through this, but I see that we got a long way to go. So let's go like this. Rav Ashi diak masnis umosiv tuta. So Rav Ashi had a diak from the Mishnah, and he therefore slugged up Rav Chanan. Tonight we learned in that Mishnah, Ein mochrim lehem duvim v'arayis. V'lo kol davar sheish bo nezek l'rabim, taima de ispe nezek, hol lespe nezek v'taima. Ari, right, mochrin, you're allowed to sell it if you can, again, neutralize the element of potential danger. But Tama, Ari, Rav Ashi now is medayik, that the reasoning of the Mishnah, and the Mishnah selected Dafka, this case of a lion, is the Samari Shavu Eitz Malacha, because a lion cannot be used for work, and you don't have to worry about Chil Shabbos. Aval midi achridim to Ovid Malacha lo. But if you found any other case of a chaya gasa that could be used for work, then you'd not be allowed to sell it. You would not be allowed to sell to an oved AvodaZara, and that would seem to be an absolute rule. Tufta the Rav Chanan bar Rav Chanan. Okay, so let's see. We have here. Okay, fine. Okay, so they use these wild, very, chaya gasas like a donkey and so forth for milling, for grinding the mill. When we were in the yeshiva, Rabbi Yehuda, he told us, okay, now here's a whole sugya about who said what in the name of what. Okay. Gmiri minoi hamilsa. I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Because I heard this ruling from a great man. Not sure if it's a Rav Ishmuel. I don't remember what I heard it from Rav Shmuel. Either way, it's a Gav Rab. And what did I hear from them? that as far as shchita is concerned, we're going to have to be machmir, and we're going to require that action of pirkus that you require in a behemadaka. Ki asoy kurkunya. When Reb Zera was there, he said, "Ashkechina l'Rav Chia Barash." I had a meeting with Rav Chia Barash. The Yosef V'Kam Mishmei Shmuel. He said it in the name of Shmuel Chai Gasa Harei Ki Behemadaka l'Pirkus. I mean, I said, Shma Mino Mishmei Shmuel Itma. Right? We didn't know whether this was a statement that was attributed to Rav or to Shmuel. Here we see that the tradition would have it, and we could go back to Shmuel. Kiasoy l'Sura, but then I went to a place called Sura. Ashkechinu l'Rav Bar Yirmiyah. I met Rav Bar Yirmiyah, the Yosef V'Kamalei Mishmei Rav, and he said the same halach in the name of Rav, namely the Chai Gasarei Kibei Badakal Pirkus. Amin, I said Shma Minoha Itmar Mishmei Rav, Itmar Mishmei Shmuel. Both Rav and Shmuel formulated the same ruling. Kisalkis lahasam, when I went all the way up to Eretz Yisrael, Ashkechinu l'Ravasi. Ravasi was the outstanding Talmud of Rav Yochanan in the Holy Land. The Yosef V'Kamar, and he was sitting there, and he stated, Amar Rav Chama Bar Guya Mishmei Rav. Now wait a second. We had it in the name of Rabba Bar Yirmiyah, and now we have it in the name of Rav Chama Bar Guria. Amri Lei, so I turned to Ravasi, who again is quoting this halach in the name of Rav Chama Bar Guria. And Amri Lei, I said to him, V'lo Savrul Amar Deman Mar Deshmaita Rabba Bar Yirmiyah. The one who said this halacha was not Rav Chama Bar Guria, but rather was Rabba Bar Yirmiyah. Amali, he says to me, Pasya Uchma. Pasya Uchma is an expression that the Talmidei Chachamim didn't take good care of themselves, and their clothes were disheveled and dirty. It's kind of like a black vessel. Literally translated, from me and from you, the transmission's teaching will be settled. In other words, proper attribution can be made. Rav Chaim Bar Guria received this teaching from Rav. Rabba Bar Yirmiyah received the teaching from Rav Chama, and that's fine. Okay then. Itmar Nami, Omer Rav Zera, Omer Rav Asi, Omer Rabba Bar Yirmiyah, Omer Rav Chama Bar Guria, Omer Rav Chaya Gasarei Kibehemo Dakal Lepirkus. Well, the Mishnah says Ein Bonim, right? We said that you can't participate, a Jew can't participate in constructing a basilica or that building that's used to house the basilica or a stadium or a platform. Omar Rabbi Chama Rabbi Yochanan, Shlosha basilicas. There are three categories of basilicas. Two of them are permissible. You can join the guy in constructing. One is prohibited. Shel Malchi Ovdei Kochavim, Shel Merchot, and Shel Otsaros. Right? So again, a basilica is some sort of very impressive, large structure, palatial structure. Now, they built such for storehouses, for bathhouses, and of course, for the kings that worshipped idols. Right, there are two that are mutter, because they're not in any way directly connected to idol worship, and one, which is Shel Malchei Ovdei Kochavim, that is prohibited. The Simonach, and I'll give you a memory device, Lesser Malcheim Bezikin. So the word lesser means to prohibit. It also means to incarcerate, but it also means to prohibit. Malcheim. In other words, for the sake of a melech, who's an idol worshiper, you're not allowed to build his basilica. Even in the case of Malchei Ovdei Kochavim, it's permissible. And that the Gemara is going to try to attack now. That premise. because clearly the basilica of these idol worshipping kings was used as a place and dedicated for the idol worship. Hatnan, we learned that Mishnah Bonim Imoim Basiliki Gardum Itzidaya Ubima. So basilica is on the list. You just told me in the Ika Diamri, according to the second tradition, that every basilica on the face of the earth is mutter. Gemara says, "Ema shall gardim shall itztaya shall bima." We're going to have to change the language of the Mishnah, and we're going to omit the case of basilica because there's no case of basilica that's prohibited. A large palatial structure by itself is used as a royal residence, so therefore assisting in its construction is permissible. Tanu Rabbanon, we learned to the Brisa. Oh, this is so fascinating. Shenitfas Rabbi Eliezer leminus. The minim, who are probably the early Christians, they tried very hard to get a hold of the Jews and missionize them and convince them that they should be heretics like themselves, and they got a hold of Rabbi Eliezer. And it's almost forcing him at gunpoint that he should accept their heresy. And the Gemara is going to try to understand, as we'll soon see, why was Rabbi Eliezer guilty in any way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would set it up that he would be taken by the heretics? Helel Gardam Lidon, they brought him for judgment. Amalo also Hegman. So the official who's in charge of the judgment says to Rabbi Eliezer, you're such a wise person, and you're studying the Torah. I mean, the Torah is just idle. Amalo, so Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Neman alai hadaya. What does that mean? The judge is believed to me. That official thought he meant himself, that Olav hu Omer, that he is relying on me, meaning he's giving me honor. Hulo Amrel in the Keneged of Shemayim, but really he meant when he said Neman alai Hadayin, the judge is trustable in my eyes. He meant the judge with a capital T and a capital J. Amalo, so the judge was so impressed by the fact that this great Rabbi Eliezer trusted him, the judge, is hol ve'amanti olai, since you trusted me, demus potur ato. Now, what's demus? So he says here, well, I've seen the word demus a lot, but I didn't know it was the name of an idol. And when the official wanted to swear, take an oath to dramatize his ruling, he mentioned the name of his great Getchka. So at the last moment, they let Rabbi Eliezer off the hook, and God spared his life. However, he was very down because he realized that God had put him in this near-death situation for some violation that he was guilty of, and lo kibul of tachnun, he would not receive any of their words of strength. Amalo Rabbi Akiva said, Rebbe, Tarshini lomar davar echad mimashal imadatani. Allow me to say something, Rabbi Eliezer, that you yourself taught us. Amalo Amar, please tell me. Amalo, Rebbe Shema minus bali yodcha. Is it possible that some heresy came your way, and here on the top of Yud Zayin, v'hinach, and you sort of heard the words of the heretics, and you enjoyed it, meaning you thought they were right. And for that split second, the heresy entered into your mind and had an influence on you. The all of this pasta, as a result, you were punished, and you were seized to this situation of being accused of whatever you were accused of, and the heresy, and you almost died. Amalo, Rabbi Eliezer said, Akiva his kartani. Meaning, thank you, Yeshakot, because you reminded me of some incident that happened in which I was tempted to accept heresy. Pam achas, he tells the following, so Yisi Mahal B'Shuk Ha'Elyon Shel Tzipori, Umatzasi Echon v'Yakov Ish Kfar Schanya Shmo. Right, this is a famous heretic. I think Tosas mentions him in Sanhedrin and in Psachim. Omar Li, and this heretic says to him, Kasuv b'Toraschem lo savi esnan zona. If you pay money to a zona, that object that you give her cannot be used on the mizbeach. Let's say you give her a sheep, or if you give her money, you can't buy a sheep for the money and bring it on the mizbeach. Ma'u lasos heimenu beis hakise. If the Torah finds the esnan zona to be so despicable, you know what? Why not use it for something despicable? Make a bathroom out of it, a toilet out of it, for the sake of the Kohen Gadol. Right, the Kohen Gadol was quarantined from his house for 7 days before Yom Kippur. Obviously, he has to relieve himself, so let's build some sort of a toilet from an esnan zona. V'lo amarti lo klum. And I didn't respond to this heretic, meaning, for 1 second, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm not going to get into an argument with this heretic. The Torah doesn't allow me to engage in a dialogue back and forth with this heretic, so he's quiet. Amali, but the heretic said something now which somehow penetrated into the heart of Rabbi Eliezer as if it was something correct. Kachlim Dani, this is what they taught me in heretic school. And he quotes a pasuk now at the end of Tanakh and Micha, and what does it say there? Ki me'esnan zona kibatza v'ad esnan zona yeshuvu. If this was collected by a harlot, which is something despicable, then it will revert ultimately to something despicable, in which case the harlot herself, who received this in payment, would eventually spend that money or use that object for the benefit of saving herself. What's the principle that underlies this pasuk in Micha, that something that comes from filth should be returned to filth? Binhani Adov. And Rabbi Eliezer admits that for a second, a fleeting second, it made sense to him that maybe we should, learn this from the heretics, that we take something that's despicable and filth and we use it for a place of filth. As a result, nitfasti leminus, I was seized by the government for purposes of being coerced into heresy. V'avarti al mashakosav b'Torah, and the Torah says, harchek me'oleha darkecha zu minus. Stay far away from heresy. V'al tikra vel pesach beisa zu rishus. And you shouldn't go near its door. Okay, this is a pasuk in Mishlei. And scripture warns us to distance ourselves from heresy, lest like Rabbi Eliezer, we find it intellectually pleasing, we may be drawn to it. So it's not enough that Rabbi Eliezer refused to answer the heretic's question. He should have walked away and not listened to the heretic's explanation. And what does this mean? And well, this will conclude for today. Al tikrav al beisa zu harishus. Corrupt rulers covet the money of the wealthy and will kill them to take it. So in other words, don't come near these corrupt rulers, because they want money and they may murder you for money. Okay, the Gemara continues with this, but we don't have time for that today. I'll wish you a great Shabbos and thank you for a week of learning, and have a wonderful Parshas Chukah Shabbos. Thank you so much.